We are here to attend another session, panel discussion entitled Digital Literacies and Virtual Exchange, State of the Field, Commentary on Digital Presentations. Please join me in welcoming our panelists today, Jhonatan Henao-Muñoz, Daniela Torres, and Valentina Vinokurova will give us an overview of the field and will synthesize the major trends, findings, and pedagogical recommendations provided in our presentation, digital presentations that you had a chance to watch this week. Jhonatan, Daniela, and Valentina are doctoral students in second language acquisition here at the University of Arizona.
Thank you, Dr. Klimanova, for the introduction. Okay, so welcome to our presentation. In order to talk about the 23 wonderful digital presentations that we've watched, we decided to split them into 3 broad categories. Hopefully you will agree with our decisions and you will be upset about not being in one category or another. Obviously, there's a lot of overlap. So the categories are studies of virtual exchange, and I will talk about those. Daniela will talk about developing literacies, critical, digital, or multimodal. And then Jhonatan will talk about the presentations that covered pedagogical aspects like specific tools, specific approaches, or even recommendations for task design. So the studies that we thought had to do more with virtual exchange, you can see on this slide. These were the speakers for the digital presentations. And I will start by talking about common methodologies and underlying assumptions. So from these presentations, it looked like SLAT was moving towards a qualitative type of research because most of these presentations were thematic analyses. Some of them were multiple case studies, but they were all qualitative rather than quantitative. For their data points, researchers relied on portfolios, diaries, interviews, again, not post and pre-tests. So they were not interested in the development of linguistic competence, but rather in the development of intercultural competence or intercultural skills, intercultural literacies, whatever you want to call them. Which tells us that there may be an assumption in the field right now, and we're hopeful that it is the assumption, because it's a wonderful assumption, that linguistic competence develops alongside other things in interaction, right? So we don't need to be checking whether our students know more language at the end of the virtual exchange project, because we assume they do. They have been interacting and developing other competences in the course of the project. Studies focused on such variables as agency, motivation, emotions, digital literacy, critical thinking, self-efficacy and self-confidence, equity and community building in virtual exchange. And interestingly, in terms of their design of the virtual exchange project itself, most studies dealt with project-based learning. So what do these studies tell us about virtual exchange? What is it good for? What does it help students achieve? One of these things was critical thinking, intercultural competence. And again, these might be perhaps obvious to us. These may be our goals with virtual exchange, but it's wonderful to see that in reality, virtual exchange really does help promote these things. Virtual exchange also helped promote agency and autonomy. One interesting example from Gerald, Murray, and Benini is their students who created, either during or after the project, they created a Facebook group, which was not part of the project, in which they helped each other, asked and answered questions, and shared resources. And one of their students even started learning Arabic after having an interaction with an Arabic-speaking student. Virtual exchange also helps promote motivation with relevant tasks, and especially these projects that were based on project-based learning. So these helped enhance motivation in students. And finally, virtual exchange has been shown by our 23 digital presentations to improve self-confidence. And an interesting case in point here is the study done by Han Radke, which in which we saw that students experience a whole array of emotions during a virtual exchange project, and they can go from fear, anxiety, and worry to self-confidence at the end of the project. In other words, at the beginning, they may feel like their linguistic competence is not enough in order to be able to successfully communicate with others, but towards the end of the project, they see that they actually can communicate, which enhances their self-confidence at the end. What are some of the lessons that we've learned from these digital presentations? How do we structure our virtual exchange projects? Gerald Murray and Benini conducted a survey among their students asking whether virtual exchange projects should be mandatory or optional. And interestingly, most of their students proposed that these should be optional. Also interesting, Gerald Murray and Benini did 2 iterations of their virtual exchange project, first mandatory and second optional. And in the first project, they had 80 participants, but in the second project, which was optional, they had 6 participants. Now that resonates with some of the findings of these scholars and also Han and Radke, that there may be initial resistance to participating, whether it be students' comfort zone that they don't want to leave, or initial feelings of fear and stress and anxiety. And Han and Radke tell us that virtual exchange and emotional enterprise in general, there are so many emotions, happiness, stress, worry, irritation, pride that occur during virtual exchange, that we should be sensitive to these emotions in our students. And they may explain the initial resistance and the desire for the projects to be optional. Which means that we should be preparing students, according to Han and Radke again, preparing students to participate in virtual exchange. One of the ways in which we can help mitigate their feelings is team building activities and meaningful tasks. So team building activities can help our students engage more deeply with their peers. Feelings of belonging to one community may help them broaden their perspectives and fight the initial resistance. It is also important that we have constant reflection and facilitation throughout the virtual exchange project. And this was overtly mentioned by Han and Radke, but it came up in all of the virtual presentations that we've watched because many researchers included self-reflection as part of their project, whether it be diaries, interviews, or focus groups. Interestingly, Ismailova suggests that development of intercultural competence is non-linear. Her multiple case study of 3 learners and their paths to developing intercultural competence suggested that learners start at different points of intercultural competence, they end with different results, and they have different paths to achieving the end product and completing the project, which tells us that it may be difficult to assess intercultural competence and its growth, but also tells us that we should not be assessing it in the ways in which we're used to doing it, quantifying intercultural growth of the intercultural competence may not be a good idea. And finally, Satar and Hawk talk about equity. They caution that we should not assume that equity will be present in digital situations. First, our students may have different access to technology. They may have different digital literacy skills, and this may lead to exasperation, I guess, because if we ask, for example, our students to introduce themselves using the digital tools, their lacking skills may lead them to be unable to represent themselves in a way in which they want to. And that can lead to identity issues and general lack of self-confidence. But what do we do going forward based on the studies of virtual exchange that were presented in this conference? What questions should we ask, and how should we change our pedagogies, and how should we do our research? So here I will present some of the questions that were inspired by some of the presentations and by the totality of the presentations as well. One question is, how can we promote interest and awareness before starting a virtual exchange project? And do we need to do that? And this again resonates with Gerald Murray and Benini's findings that students prefer optional projects and they have initial resistance. Are there ways in which we can tell our students what to expect from the project, what feelings are normal, why that project is beneficial for them, and will that be helpful for students going into a virtual exchange project? Another question is, how do students deal with emotions during virtual exchange? Han and Radke gave us a whole array of emotions that students feel, but it would be interesting in the future to study how students deal with these emotions. Understanding that may help us help less successful students in the course of their virtual exchange experience. Next, can we conduct virtual exchange within the boundaries of one country to promote understanding of their own culture in our students? All of the projects, at least in this section of our synthesis, were projects of virtual exchange between different countries, which makes sense, right? We want to develop intercultural competence. But Ismailova's project showed an interesting case of a student who realized in the course of the project, or at least proposed, that the United States culture is not monolithic, right? It's not homogenous. There are different people in different parts of the United States, and there are cultural differences between them. So it would be interesting in the future to see virtual exchange studies within the boundaries of one country and to see whether that helps promote intercultural or intra-cultural competence within our students. And finally, what specific design features can ensure equity in digital exchange? Now, Satar and Hawk do propose some ways to ensure digital equity in digital contexts, but it would be interesting to have studies that follow up on that and actually try to implement some features and see whether those help ensure digital equity.
Okay, so as Valentina mentioned, we regrouped the presentations, and now I will be focusing on those studies that focus on developing literacies, critical, digital, and multimodal literacies. So here we can see some themes across the presentations in this group, in which they talk about games and affinity spaces for the students, translanguaging practices that happen inside and outside the classroom, mixed reality technologies that allow sharing free content for students and instructors. We also saw how critical literacy and symbolic competence can be introduced in the foreign language classroom, and many of them draw from the multiliteracies framework, as well as education and multimodal literacies and social semiotics in their studies. Yeah, so about the methodologies and common frameworks that we have seen in this presentation, as Valentina mentioned, we could see how all of them gravitated towards a qualitative method. And also we could see how in the case of Horton, we could use Digication as an open canvas that is available for multilingual students to create their own e-portfolio, which also we saw that it allowed collaborative writing practices. We could see how literacy development unfolds in 3 multilingual students in the study of Horton's, and how through feedback and collaboration, all those practices led to the recognition of their writing complexity and the professional and identity development. Moving towards practices in the classroom, we could see in Gorham how students went through the process of doing annotated poems, and then multimodal debate and multimodal campaign design that included social, cultural, and political issues. And SMICH, they created an open resource, a multiliteracies manual for teaching Turkish, which was included a framework of multiliteracies and learning by design that they developed using Adobe Spark, and that now it's an open resource available for instructors and for students that include numerous examples such as Turkish vocabulary, greetings, literature, activities and description of them. So it's a combination of multiliteracies framework as well as other digital resources that they included in there. Also, we saw how blogging reflections in AMGOD presentation allow students to reflect about their linguistic and cultural experiences when being abroad. In this case, it was in France. And the importance of adopting a character in fairy tales in a German language classroom, as well as gaming, digital gaming, that gave different opportunities to the students to communicate through different modes and also to reflect on their practices. So here we wanted to highlight some positive lessons that we have learned after watching at these compositions, after watching at these presentations. We could see how the characteristics of gaming, digital gaming, which is it occurs in an immersive and an engaging environment. It allows for combining digital text, affinity spaces, and semiotic system. So if you're an instructor and you are wondering, okay, what digital gaming can offer to me as instructor and to my students? So it allows for mini making through multiple modes. And we saw how in addition to the it can create opportunities for students to engage in different discourses and having peer interactions. And very importantly, the creation of affinity spaces, which are communities that share a place where learning happens. It's a location where groups of people are drawn together because of a shared strong interest. And so they create their own systems of science, which is very helpful in the second language classroom. Some other positive lessons we have learned is that digital spaces can facilitate a community of care. It's a community that centers around sponsoring one another in the students' literacy development in an inclusive manner, in an equitable manner. We also saw how powerful is and how impactful it is to combine social competence, symbolic competence, sorry, and critical literacies in the second language classroom for disrupting commonplaces, disrupting the status quo, and making students be surrounded by different dialects, different registers, cross-cultural discourses, and even translanguaging practices, and then taking action. We saw how the use of blogging in this case, in the case of Ambo's study, it creates transnational spaces. So through her reflective blogging that she designed, it created a transnational space in which students, their peers, their host families, because we have to remember that this happened in a study abroad context, they become viewers of these blogs and also participants in the video. So this approach allowed the students to learn as social and as individuals, as well as giving them the chance to cultivate their journey and position themselves as multilingual speakers. And finally, we could see through the study by Tim Lin that the expressions of the students through digital interaction often take the form of expressing opinions, reflection, and interpretation of meanings in text. So we could see how the digital spaces allow students to analyze through having a deeper experimentation. To conclude this section, we wanted to focus on pedagogical implications and things to look forward in future research and future pedagogical practices. We saw how digital games can be an alternative for having discussions about cultural values and ideologies that are represented in the game, and also to promote participation. And something that is very important is this sense of belonging to a community, to a learning community. Also, Horton's highlighted the importance for creating inclusive and supportive classrooms. And this means being inclusive to all type of identity in the classroom and supporting them and advocating for time and space to create, to experiment, to design, and to try new things, and even to fail. Even the failing part is important for the student's language development. And finally, as proposed by Team for future research, there is a need for more in-depth exploration of spontaneous language production, as well as examination of language production in popular apps such as Snapchat or Instagram stories, to be able to explore the use of visuals and other forms of digital expressions that the students are using.
Good morning, everyone. This is the tier subgroup we have for this presentation, and it's about pedagogical perspectives, tools, approaches, and task design, in which we find a common pattern in these articles with these authors related to the pedagogical practices for research and teaching purposes. Then, there is an opportunity outside. There is in the internet, there are lots of applications, lots of apps, lots of platforms in which you can take advantage of. And these authors, they choose some of them or a combination of them to provide a pedagogical practice. Among them, we have platforms like Tingling, Google Tools, fandoms for translation, multimodal tandem corpora, also the use of information communication technologies, and so on. So the authors here, they were describing what was going on, how we can implement these technologies within the classroom. So we have the tools. Now we need, as the authors mentioned, we need to put it in practice. What is the use of these tools within the classroom practice? Then we have, of course, if we are talking about Tingling, for example, we are looking for digital enhancements with that spotlight local languages and cultures accurately. Here we have the example of Professor Castek and Anaya, in which they were working in an ebook for local communities and for the revitalization of the language and the culture, and to them avoid any misconception with any cultural misunderstanding with the current text. Also, they provide a Google Tour Builder as an app to recognize, connect, and invite communities in which we don't have access to a community within the community, for example, in the tribal zones in Arizona, or even internationally in countries you cannot visit so far. Also, there are other studies in which they talk about the importance of using podcasts to promote transnational dialogue and intercultural competence, in which we are decentralizing the language teaching. Instead of teaching just the standard language, the official language, we are teaching as well the varieties of those languages, the culture behind this. Also, in terms of translation, there are lots of opportunities outside in which there are no focus on pedagogy, but we can take advantage of them to analyze it as a pedagogical opportunity to enhance collaboration, to be used for pedagogical translation, transsemitization, as well as transcultural communication, in which there are collaboration here among fans of a common topic, like accommodated learner. Also, they were talking about online platforms that are not only for transition from face-to-face learning to online learning, but also to reevaluate curricula. What we're going to do with this platform in these times, or how we can take advantage of these tools in these critical times of the world. Also, they offer possibilities as we have like a multimodal tandem corpora, in which it can be used for research resources. They have multimodal artifacts like conversation, audiovisuals, as well as writing materials that can be used not only for research for the instructor, for the teacher, but also to take examples for second language learners as well. Then they also use Zoom that we are used to, in which they use it in a study on that reach for service learning, in which students, ESL students, they were teaching English as an additional language to Afghan students in a telecollaborative way. Not only to an exchange teacher and student, but also cultural exchanges, understanding the other cultures as well. Then Google Tools that we already know, but this one to get to know the learner's needs, to collaborate as Google Forms, to try to understand the students' needs before starting a course, before starting any project within the course. Then we have the corpus, see, yeah, the coil, in which they look for developing telecollaboration with virtual exchange courses and create networking. So here in this platform, they are teaching you how you can create, how you can start to create exchange programs, visualized programs. Also, there are platforms like Slack, Slurps as well, to digital collaborate with images and 3D discussion between students in a non-invasive way, in a more organic way for them. And also the visual exchanges are not only for just tasks or just asynchronous. There are possibilities to have synchronous and asynchronous activities, or even a complete course to motivate students, to motivate learners to go beyond the language and understand the cultures overseas. There are some approaches, of course. So we have the tools, we have a purpose with those tools, but also we have to think about what is behind these tools. So some of the more silent approaches they have used were create to learn. The students is taking a role of agent here, and is going beyond the text. Is becoming multimodal, multiliterate, and digital literate to understand the world around. Also, we are leaving the standard language approach to go to a pluricentric language, also a transnational language, in which we are going beyond borders. We are understanding that there are diversity within the languages, and all of them are valued. Also, the informal language learning in the digital wilds, in which you can use the forums, not only for the translation fandoms, but also the Reddit or other platforms in which you have authentic interactions, authentic productions of native speakers of a language. Also, it was, again, the literacy and multiliteracy approach that is important for these pedagogical tools and digital tools, and they are enhancing online collaboration. That is the trend in these pedagogical perspectives. Also, the visual exchange, that is not a new term because people has been used it several times ago, but it is being formalized as the interaction, not only synchronous, but asynchronically, and also for not only for tasks, but also for complete courses, among others, of course. There are several affordances in these studies and these different tools. Most of them, they are cross-list. And we have, in general, like the teacher agency, in which the teacher is going beyond the textbook, is going beyond following a lecture, is creating materials, understanding the materials, and make it understandable for the students. Also, the material is becoming more authentic, multisensory because of the tools and the multimodality aspects. Also, the students is getting more attention as is desired, as well as an agent role. Also, the collaboration, visual literacies, digital literacies, and offline options are available for them during these papers. Learning autonomy is one of the most important things here, because we are allowing them to create their knowledge, to understand, to getting engaged. Also, the informed participation, the textual or oral gender awareness, in which we are passing from listening to the audio from the textbook to having a real podcast with real people with different dialect or different variety of the language. The multilateralist approach and the intercultural competence is super highlighted in the papers, as well as the transnational dialogue. Telecollaboration, virtual exchanges, team building skills, and also for instructors and educators, networking, collaborating in virtual exchange allow you to have another colleague from another part of the world and propose interdisciplinary international research. Also, the digital critical exchange and the intercultural learning and cultural awareness is something that we have to take into consideration, because you have to be literate in digital terms. You have to understand what is going on, and that the tools we are using in the classroom is not just for the sake of having fun. It's for the sake of learning and going beyond. Then we have, of course, what is in the future, taking into consideration what the authors present. Of course, this opportunity with these tools is a chance to acknowledge and enhance local languages, their varieties, and their communities in an authentic way with the real actors, the real people. Also diversify the materials, the genre, and create transdisciplinary dialogues. Not only talk about language, but also to take into consideration aspects for the professional life for the students and more closer to their interest. Also, this is an opportunity to take into consideration the reevaluation of courses for online teaching. Remember that we were in a transition, in a strong transition from face-to-face to online teaching, and we are not considering the fact that we need to adapt our materials and to make our virtual spaces more accessible than before. Also, these tools that give an opportunity to self-reflect on online teaching, learning practices, considering cultural roles. Also, the design and include visual exchange in the curricula is one of the most silent aspects because of the real contact with the L2 or L1 learners. Also, there is a need to implement more cross-cultural collaboration in virtual exchanges, not only for enhancing communicative competence, but also for understanding others' culture and its own culture. Also, there are more further than the English-speaking countries, we have a need of more research on informational communicative technologies and their application in the classroom in countries outside the United States. And also, we need, as usual, to transform the digital aspect, the digital environments into learning environments, to take advantage of those resources that are, most of them, for free. We can adapt them to the classroom, to our research purposes. And I think that's all. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for my colleagues to this presentation. And if you have any question, we can pass to the question, comments, reflections in the chat or in the mic. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Valentina, Daniela, and Jhonatan. If you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Our presenters will be happy to answer them. We have a comment from Chantel. She says, thank you very much for this wonderful overview. And the question is, what aspects of the future direction suggested by all these talks are you particularly excited about? You as junior scholars who will be moving the field forward.
Okay, I can go first real quick. Some of the questions that I proposed were not mentioned by the speakers, but inspired by their speeches. So the questions that I presented, I'm really excited about, and especially, seeing studies that do virtual exchange within one country. I'm almost ready to try it myself now, because it just seems like it would be very good for students to understand that their cultures are not monolithic before they get exposed to other cultures. Even myself as a teacher, I often say these horrible, horrible things about Russians, and I teach Russian language. Like I will stereotype myself sometimes. So I feel like me and my students need to understand that cultures are not monolithic.
For me, thank you. It was wonderful to see how these multiliteracy framework are implemented in the class. But what I hope is to see more of this implementation, not just in the second language classroom, but also in the heritage language classroom, which I feel that it's a population of students that is under study and under research. And I want to see how multiliteracy's framework can help in identity development and agency. So that's one of the things I'm looking forward for future research.
Excellent. Jhonatan.
Following Valentina's contribution, I was thinking about the decentralization of the official language and the teaching of varieties of the same language through different tools like the podcast, to having local communities and you understanding what is going beyond a textbook, and recognizing that there is no perfect or wrong way to say something. There is several variations in these terms. And also the opportunity that these tools offer, especially the ones with the forums and the fandom translation, in which I'm interested in which, okay, you are not required to be a professional in translation. You are a fan, you are a committed learner. You want to know something about this culture, and you're going to do with your means to reach this goal. And in a collaborative way, all of them are contributing to a common goal, to translate a series, a workshop, a content, a manga, if you want, a comic. And I just wondering, and it was all over the videos, the webinars, and it was related to the digital literacy importance here, the critical digital literacy. So we are, as instructors, as researchers, we are saying, okay, our students, they need digital literacies, critical digital literacies. But we are forgetting, or we are omitting an important role in their learning, that are the instructors. Are our instructors, are our educators trained to understand what is going on with digital literacy? Are they digital literate, or are we just being, we don't want to adapt to the change? We are there. So I wonder if for future research, the focus will be more on the instructor part rather than the student, because I know that the students is going to enjoy, at least most of them are going to enjoy a new tool, a new opportunity. However, how we are going to teach our teachers to use new approaches, that would be.
Excellent, thank you. I have a question for you all. I was actually curious to see how you divided your presentation into 3 parts. And you had a section on research as a separate section on pedagogy. And this is a common, a very well-known divide between what we do for research and the findings we discuss in academic literature, and the actual practices, what teachers do in the classroom, how they implement various projects. So, and it seems to me, even given the way you structured your talk today, that this divide is still there. And my question to you all is this: is there a way for us to try to close this divide and have our teaching practices be informed by research? And if yes, then how can we do this?
It's a great question. And I wanted to, before I answer it, I wanted to make it clear that we had a really hard time creating the categories. It's just we knew we needed to separate the load, right? That's how you, in virtual exchange, that's how you collaborate. But we had a really hard time separating them, and we just went with, oh, this talk has more of a focus on the data that's collected than the results, or this one has more focus on how they did it rather than what they saw at the end. So that's what we did. We think, if I may speak on behalf of my colleagues, we think that there isn't too big a divide, but it's just that researchers or presenters have to focus on one thing or the other. In fact, I had a feeling that research was informed by pedagogy, because they were, and pedagogy was informed by the research as well, because there were reflections as part of the project, which researchers propose as necessary, and there was constant facilitation and revision and tailoring to student interests. So we'll see what my colleagues say, but I'm hopeful in that there isn't as big a divide as it may seem from our presentation.
Excellent. Daniela?
Yes, so it was a good question, and sometimes I feel that there is a dichotomy between teaching and researching practices, and that maybe sometimes there are some instructors that focus on teaching and they see research as a faraway thing, inaccessible, and the conferences and presentation seems to be different. So I think that maybe looking in the future, we need to create bridges with teaching practices and research to go hand by hand, and then having instruction that is based on the research and the findings that we have in order to make our practices better and well-informed.
Jhonatan?
Following Daniela's contribution, I was thinking the same. There is the same dichotomy: or you research or you teach, but no both. And we need teachers that are researchers and researchers that are teachers. At least researchers that teach teachers what is going on in the research, in the current trends. So I would say that something that I learned from these webinars we have watched is that we are, as researchers, we are able to simplify content and to make ourselves understandable for a classroom teacher. And I think that one of the trends I see here is the researchers are becoming reader friendly, not expert friendly. So if we want to collaborate with the research, we need participants. And how we're going to get participants if we are putting out our teachers that are our link with the participants. So by making our content understandable or simplifying in such a way that they can implement our findings in their classroom, I think that there is a meaningful future for the intersection teaching research in second language acquisition and technologies as well.
And if I may add, in order to conduct a research project, our researchers, they had to teach, right? They had to design a pedagogical project and they had to put it in place. So there is kind of a meeting of pedagogy and research there, but perhaps on the side which focuses on pedagogy, there are ample opportunities, and I'm sure teachers do that, to look at the results and to see student impressions. It's just that perhaps in the digital presentations, we didn't see that reported, but I am sure that teachers who implement virtual exchange and digital multimodal literacy-based curricula, they do learn from their experience going forward. But it would be great if they shared it with us, shared their lessons.
We don't have any more questions in the chat box, but I do have one last question. We have been doing this conference, L2DL conference, as a virtual conference for the first time. And this is definitely a new way of sharing knowledge and promoting exchange of information, exchange of research findings. And you three, you worked, you had a very big task to complete. You watched all the digital presentations and you learned from each of these presentations. So my question is this format, virtual presentation, is going to change the way we distribute knowledge, we share knowledge? Would that be a path for us to transmit our findings to teachers, to practicing teachers, to students? What is your opinion about this?
Now that you say it, I think maybe we should create a multimodal journal, which instead of accepting papers, accepts digital presentations, because, you know, we all consume information in different ways. And I, for one, appreciated being able to see and listen rather than to just read. It was easier to consume information that way. And I thought the presentations were all clear and well prepared. So I thought it was a wonderful experience all in all.
Yeah, I agree with you. It was a wonderful experience to be able to, first of all, be able to watch these presentations at my own path. And we have been talking about different modes of learning and different type of learning and different modes of expression, right? So these, I think that this aligns with what we have been talking, right? And allowing people to sit down when they have time, when they are mentally prepared, and watch a video, dosify it, and really understand what they are watching. And also, I think we are gravitating to open learning resources. So having these conferences that allow the knowledge to be distributed more broadly and freely, I think it's a great thing to do. Yeah.
I totally agree with them. Actually, I was having the opportunity to have self-paced in the process of a conference and say, okay, I can focus on this aspect. I don't understand this. I want to analyze further detail this and interact with the other participants and the speakers via the UHA app. It was wonderful because you have the quick response and you can interact with people from around the world. So this conference or this modality is allowing us to have more people, more connections, more opportunities to research and to learn about the others. It's important, it's meaningful, and it's an opportunity to breaking borders, breaking miscommunication, understanding the other. So that's all.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you, Daniela, Valentina, and Jhonatan for this insightful presentation. I've learned a lot from your presentation, from your summary. I wish you all the best in your studies. Thank you again and enjoy our next session.